So I think there's sort of three schools of architecture that have happened right now. There's culture-based architecture, which is what we are, which look at the problem as a disciplinary problem whose most important contribution is to the way we think about ourselves, who we are, who each other is, and what we are collectively, and those sorts of arrangements. It's not about the values of good building. Does anybody know the seven most frequently cited values by a residential client for architecture? Any of you study architecture in undergraduate school? Where? UIC? Before Bob? 2 years ago. And did you ever take a class in schools? Did you ever take a class in how to design a school? How to design a hospital? How to design an airport? Never took a building type class once in your entire life. How to design a house. That's weird, don't you think? Did you think it was weird at the time? Have you ever gone up to one of your teachers or to Eric or to Bob and say, how come we don't take, like when I'm going to go out of here, I'm going to be building building types, schools, libraries, museums, houses, hospitals, prisons. Why don't we study those? That seems like it would make sense, doesn't it? Well, why didn't you? Do you feel like you should get your money back? Don't you wish you knew? No, you have a degree in architecture. How long have you been in architecture? Tell me something in architect. What does an architect do with a window? Light. Okay. That's it? Just light? You mean air? Okay. Qualities of light. So, but does air count? Window lets in air? Yeah. Views? Now, that's 4 years of architecture. You got light, air, and views. So let me ask you, what would you have said the day before you started architecture school if I asked you what an architect does with a window? I'm pretty sure I can get light, air, and views from anybody. Aren't you? So you have 4 years of architectural education. I ask you about one of the most important elements in the field, and you don't have an answer any different from somebody that has zero education. Do you know why that is? No. No, it's actually not true. You do know the answer. You just don't know the trick. That's a different thing. That costs more money. But there is one. I'll show it to you in a second. Let me just close up. Before I get to the lecture. But let's get back to this question of representation. Like, is an architectural Mobius, I suppose you would think that since that's an act that the idea of a Mobius is so intrinsically connected to architecture, to mathematics, that all architecture could possibly do is represent it, according to what you said. Is that right? H? What do you think? I'm just asking. I'm not trying to trick you. Like, this is not really Mobius. You can't really do this. You can't walk over this wall.
That is what I said. Is that what you're saying, though?
No, you said that.
That is true, yes.
So, to the extent that this has any ambition to have a relationship to the Mobius at all, it is a poor representation of something that only comes to fruition in another discipline. Sure. Okay. There is another way to think about that. Another way to think is what would be Mobius effects in architecture that are parallel to Mobius effects in mathematics. You see how easy this job is? So all I got to get from you to do is say, I don't know. Yeah, because wouldn't that be, like if you have no idea what they are, and you have no idea what they did, and you have no idea what the relationship is to these they are here, how do you know if we're still working on them? That's true. Do you know Newton's 3 laws of motion? You know 2 out of 3. I can hear them. Wow. That's cute. That's good. You know them? An object in motion will remain in motion at a constant velocity and, well, you know, everybody in here, everyone always leaves out the single most important thing to an architect: in a straight line. An object in motion will remain in motion at the same velocity in a straight line. That's a weird thing. Like, how the fuck you find a straight line? Like, I throw an object in motion. Why is there a straight line? What does that mean, a straight line? Like, where does the straight line in the universe come from? It used to be considered a proof of God. The other one is an object at rest will remain at rest unless acted on by an outside force, right? And then the third one was every action has an equal and opposite reaction, which is sort of what you were trying to say. So we all kind of know Newton's laws, and you're not physics majors. But the 5 points in architecture, like if you get into a field, and do you actually think you know how to do architecture? You think you know how to judge your work? You think you know how to judge any other work? You would like to be an architect, right? Okay. I want you to be an architect. And by the way, there's nothing going to stop you. The generosity of the arts is anyone can do it. Anyone's entitled to do it. You don't have to know shit to do it. Plus, there's a truth that comes from poetry, and it's this: every bad poet will write a great stanza, and every great poet will write a bad stanza. So there's nothing that says, if you don't know shit about it, that you're also never going to do good work. You can. It's possible. The question is, do you want to kind of shortcut that and try to help out your chances? Sort of, yeah. That's kind of what you come here for. Chances at what? We haven't figured out yet. But how about this? You get to a field. It's the most mysterious field, and all your teachers tend to do is mystify it even more. Right? Like, you hope they're going to tell you how to make a decision, how to work, just something, and somehow it just gets more and more and more mysterious, and finally you become one of the mysterions, and then now you're an architect. But somewhere in that field, there's a sentence that says, the 5 points of architecture. Don't you think you'd learn them? Like, fuck, there's a guy who said at least I should figure out what he did wrong. Right? So can anybody name the 5 points of architecture?
Open floor plan, longer windows, rooftop garden, raised off the ground.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty good. Ribbon windows, P-L-O-T, always ends in an S, but it never say it. It's always plural. Free plan, free facade, rooftop garden. Good. Anything there about, I can teach a parrot to say that. I said I can teach a parrot to say that. Those 5 things, yeah. I've had a harder time teaching architecture students to say it, but I can get you to do it. I threaten you enough. So it's good. That's very good that you learn. Now, what do they add up to? What are they about? What architectural effect do they produce? Or are they hoping to produce? Yeah, modernism. See, these are I like it, I don't like it answers. Like, modernism is not like, let's say you're right. These were principles of modernism, and that's right. And I look at the principles, like I look at Newton's 5 laws, or 3 laws. Actually, I had 4 laws, because there's a law of gravity, it's not part of 3 laws. Law of gravity is interesting. Don't you think the law of gravity is interesting? Do like this if you think the law is gravity. Like, do you think gravity is interesting? Is gravity strong? How many of you think gravity is very strong? Good. How many of you have a refrigerator in your house? How many of you have a magnet on it? Isn't that magnet defeating gravity? So that little bitty fucked up magnet that's that big is able to defeat the entire gravity of the Earth. And you still think gravity's strong. Gravity's unbelievably weak, and it's no big deal. It's not essential to architecture. It's just no big deal. Like, if you fuck up on the gravity part, it's not architecture, it's a lawsuit. You know, no one gives a shit about the architecture. And it must be easy, since look at all this crap that gets built. So, why the gravitational law is interesting is it's F equals G m1 m2 over r squared. That means that no matter where you are in the universe, you can feel everything else in the universe. That also means there's no such thing as anything existing without being acted on by an outside force. Which means, I know you're from Spain. Aren't you from Spain? Thailand? Italy. Spain, Italy is the same place. Show closed is what I call it. It's like a poster. Yeah. Opening next week, Germany. Spain and Italy, it's tough to come from Spain and Italy. There's too much history. Yeah, it's just too much memory. Rome is the worst. Plus the driving is terrible. So, where were we? Now we're through with gravity's nothing. Gravity's nothing. Nothing to gravity. There's nothing to gravity. It's easy. Yeah, that's right. What do the 5 points add up to? That's true. But the point of a method is an effect. Exactly right. It is a method. And we're past method, because H has presented himself in his acting studies as no longer a devotee of the canon of method. He's post-method. And actually the Chicago Improv School, like Bill Murray and those guys, where you wear your character lightly, is more in style now. There are other techniques, but they're still technique-based, but there are other techniques. And so there was nothing wrong about method, but its weaknesses and inadequacies became more interesting than its strengths, because its strengths were easy to learn and familiarly demonstrated. So it was not a problem that was wrong. It's a problem that got completed and entered our repertoire of ability to produce effects, but was no longer of much interest as an experimental way to think about new ways to perform. That's what happened to postmodernism. So I'm at now, here are 5 points in architecture, 5 points that are presented by an architect as the basis of modern architecture. And all I'm asking you is, what effect do they add up to? Okay. A style. That's actually the book was called The International Style. And it reduced, Philip Johnson and Hitchcock reduced the 5 points to 3. Flat roofs, ribbon windows, and stucco. He got rid of free plan and free design. Patrick Schumacher, who was here. Did you go hear his lecture, or at least 2 or 3 hours of it? Good friend of mine, I love Patrick. Very serious guy. But he makes a very serious argument about architectural style being its most important vector of political effect. So I'm not going to dismiss the idea. I think style is really important. And I think it's true that that kind of architecture reached its conclusion in a certain sense as a form of professional practice, because we got tired of the style. But we're still trying to accomplish a lot of what it was trying to do. And so hold to the idea style. I'm not going to say it's wrong. I'm going to say it's inadequate to this particular answer. All right, so where would you start? Got to pick a point. Got to pick one of the points and figure out what it does. I probably won't. Am I meeting y'all again for another lecture? I don't know. I could do this lecture, but this is important. I'll do this and then we can quit or whatever. Just pick a point. Anybody pick a point. Young man with a wrong colored blue, like that's so wrong for you, that blue. Yeah. Your mom likes it? Wow, that's two wrong things in a row. The blue and the confession. Do you live at home? Where are you from? And are you homesick? Is that the color of blue there? Blue sky. Where did you go to undergraduate? I studied architecture? Well, what's the difference? Then why did you make the distinction? I see. So you took industrial design or product design or something like that. So have you ever heard of the 5 points before? Okay. Pick one. Okay, good. Rooftop garden. By the way, Corb wrote down what he meant. Do you think we understand the 5 points a day as what he says they did? No. Knowledge that's introduced by an author or a researcher grows. So when we teach the 5 points a day, or when I teach the 5 points a day, it's slightly different. It's not slightly, it's different from what Corb says, although it contains what he says. So I'm not really, it's got nothing to do with knowing what the architect says. It's got to do with allowing yourself to think about the effects. So you want to do rooftop garden. So why is a rooftop garden important? No, you're trying to guess what effect it has.
I would say in the next 7 years,
I see. So somehow the exterior landscape comes into the building and then goes up to the roof. Yeah, that's a good answer. It's unfortunately "27 years too early in history." Getting into the building the modernism of getting into the building from in the Corbusier trajectory doesn't happen until Congrès de Palais, 1957, 6. It's the key to understanding the Seattle Library. So you're absolutely right about that being the future of this discussion, but it's not right about this discussion. Although, I'm not saying you couldn't make an argument about it. There is a vortex if you look at the pattern, if you look at the plans, there is a kind of internal circulation vortex. Most commonly, that's understood to be exactly the opposite, about disseminating forces from the building out. And so this question of whether the building changes the world by disseminating forces away from it, or changes the world by bringing the forces of the world into it and then re-originating them in a different way, that's a big debate. That's at the essence of contemporary revision of modernism versus that. Okay. Jishu Library. Any of you know that? Okay. All right. So, but it's good. So it has a relationship to the landscape. Why ribbon windows? I see. Okay, so the ribbon windows, like why not just no windows? Or why not a field of punch windows? A field of punch windows? How would they suggest that? I mean, I'm not arguing. Like I was thinking of Rossi's Modena which is a cube with a field of punch windows. So it kind of abstracts the form. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just curious about.
Just in the spaces between suggest.
I see. You could see the. Okay. All right. In 1921 or 1922, Le Corbusier got into an argument with his best friend and teacher, Auguste Perret. You know this story? Over the French window versus the ribbon window, or the window, fenêtre longue. And this argument didn't occur in architectural circles. It occurred on the front page of the most important cultural newspaper in Paris. And it started out as a polite argument, and it ended up as an incredibly bitter argument about architecture's relationship to humanity. It was about this window. Started out as a quality of light, and interiority ended up as a sort of philosophy about man and his relationship to the building. So if you know that, why would you say demonstrate the free facade? Who made you read that? My student. This whole fucking faculty. You're all good. And I tell you what, I said that wrong, and it's important to me. I don't have a student. I have people that were in my classes. I mean, when I hear what they say, I'm as shocked as I can possibly. I'm glad they're saying it. I'm glad people like it, but I don't ever feel like I had anything to do with causing it to happen. I don't like the culture of someone saying he was my student. I like the, he was in my class, mostly fucked up. Like, I thought Hernan was going nowhere. Like, I thought if there was ever a guy in one of my classes that I was sure had no future, it was Hernan. And I still think that's true. Okay, let's speed this up a little bit. But one thing that's always important in architecture, and pretty much governs most of its thinking until very recently, is how a building meets the ground. How a building meets the ground is super important. Most of the most valuable effects in architecture come from that. For example, walking up a staircase. Why is walking up a staircase so important? Any of you been to the Louvre? You been to the Louvre? Anybody heard of the Louvre? Anybody heard of the winged victory of Samothrace? Berlin? Come on. What do you think it is? It's called the Nike. It's also called the winged victory of Samothrace. It's a famous sculpture. Okay. In the Louvre, is it an important sculpture? It's really important, right? Is it the best in history? Yeah, you think so? You've been to France? Been to the Louvre? Did you go inside the middle where there's a big open space and there's a staircase and a big statue at the top called the Winged Victory? Very important, right? Super important. How do you know? From the architecture. Because it's at the top of that staircase. So as you go up and look at it, it's a Roman presentation. Now, here's something funny. Where is Samothrace? Anybody know? It's in Greece. So the Winged Victory is a Greek sculpture, which means, because of Choissy's studies of processional sculpture in Greece, it's meant to be viewed from a 45-degree angle. And it comes alive from a 45-degree angle. But in the Darius staircase, the most famous staircase in the Louvre, which was the house of the king, this great staircase, it was a ceremonial staircase. They put that thing on the top. It now makes it the single most important work of art in the entire Louvre. But in so doing, it presents it on the axis of Quartus and Decumanus of a Roman axis. It means you can't see it. There's no way to view it from affording, unless you're willing to jump up on the corner of that little, that whatever you call that thing, that little landing you land on. If you look, you jump on the corner, there's a wall there, and look at it, which you can do. I mean, if you're crazy, you'll see how fantastic it is. Other than that, the architecture is telling you it's fantastic, but in order to tell you it's fantastic, it has to kill it. This is something, by the way, I'm really proud of, since I'm not that interested in sculpture, but I'm very interested in architecture. Why do you almost always go up a staircase to a church? I know, but you feel, I tell you what, man, you better go find this out. You actually feel like you're leaving a kind of profane world and going into a sacred world. It sets up the ceremonial entry into the church. Why are the doors so big in the church? In case some super tall, fat guy comes? Yes, if you were Bataille, that's what he would say. If you were me, you would say to make God feel big, but it's about the same thing. Yeah. So these are small tricks that every architect knows. It's why you almost never find a museum that you go down the staircase. There's a few of them, and you go down the staircase for a really interesting way. Because when you're going down a staircase, where are you going? Been to the Vietnam Memorial? When you go into the Vietnam Memorial, where do you go? You go down. So this change in grade turns out to have a really profound poetic effect. It's not about meaning. It's not about getting it. Most of the people it happens to, they have no idea that it's happened to them. But it has a solemnizing effect. And so people are now working with what it means to go down a staircase and try to change that, like Peter Eisman at the Wexler Center, stuff like that. So these are small effects. But how a building meets the ground is good for 80% of the stuff you're going to see. And the two basic models for how a building meets the ground are the pyramid and the cube. Those are the archetypes, those are the geometric archetypes of architecture. Just the pyramid and the cube. No cylinders, no spheres, nothing else. That's it. A pyramid and a cube. And a pyramid meets the ground by reinforcing the location and the materiality and the status of the local condition, like the pyramids do. And a cube, because it has 6 sides, detaches the building from the ground. Okay. Which is why such effort is being made when you want the effect of a cube, or more technically, a right parallel pipehead form, to show the bottom. Okay, so the first thing you have to understand is that this building is doing its best to get off. Now the question is, should I say the ground? Does it really want to get off the ground? And the answer is no. What it wants to get off is the land. Okay? What's the difference? Pardon me? What's the difference between ground and land? That's it. That's absolutely it. You'll never see ground. You'll only see land. But land is a cultural you can kill somebody. There's such a thing as homeland security. This land is your land. No one said this ground is your ground. Home ground, ground coffee. That's about as good as you can do with coffee. So land is the saturation of the ground by the political histories, memories, expectations that define a political context. And architecture was built by power structures. What's your name? Yeah. Adam, just like Adam said, if you figure out was it a rich person or the church or the government, and they have a vested interest in reasserting the status of the ground, and architecture is really good at that, super good at it. The pyramidal diagram is fantastic at asserting the status of the ground, and therefore the legitimacy of the power that constructs the architecture that asserts that diagram. So the early modernists, when I asked you what you associate with modernism, generally I was taught, and I still think of them as having a real egalitarian ambition, that they are participating in a changing world where mass production, standardization is going to raise the standard of life for everybody. And also, there'll be a more, maybe not democratic, but a more egalitarian sense of social arrangements and relationships. So, the entitlement to power will be open to discussion and not simply ceremonial or inherited. So the question of architecture, modern architecture begins with the fact that before modern architecture, architecture served power, and it served it incredibly well. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not here to teach you that. Bataille argued, he's a French philosopher, that architecture is intrinsically corrupt because it could do nothing but serve power. That when you walk in a church and an architect has made you feel solemn and reverent, you're not actually solemn and reverent to God, you're obedient to the priest. And he would be delighted for the affairs of the Catholic Church over the last couple of decades, because basically that kind of obedience is instantiated through the authority that the architecture so excellently. Like, you go into a church, you're quiet. You're not arguing with the priest. You don't feel like you want to. You don't feel suppressed. The wonderful thing is it's not a form of oppression, it's a form of seduction. And its powers are fantastic. So the 5 points, to make a long story short, add up to how does one disestablish the ground as land and reestablish it as something else. And the word for that something else will be datum. So sometimes I'll hear on your reviews, oh, it's, there's the ground, and ground, land, and datum are chosen interchangeably. Okay, but the 3 data in the 5 points, which are the rooftop garden and the free plan and the fact that the pilotis lift the building off the ground, are about multiplying the ground so that it disestablishes power as land and tries to establish it as a kind of open field of events for a datum. So basically the roof, so keep the pyramid, pyramids meet the ground big and meet the sky small. It used to be you would teach this same lesson in terms of sky and ground. Sky has fallen off. We don't really have the same relationship in architectural discourse to the sky. So what would have been taught 30 and 40 years ago, we don't really teach that much. We don't teach how important architecture's relationship to the sky is. This is a Heideggerian idea. But the ground is still important, super important. So those 3 multiply the datum. So that causes the disestablishment. The pilotis are a field and also have no capital and so they don't distinguish the bottom and the top like a column does. And the ribbon window doesn't frame the individual body, but produces a collective possibility of a view and erases the sky and erases the foreground. So essentially the ribbon window does exactly what a pilotis does. It gets rid of the things that reinforce the difference between ground and sky, which are the techniques architects use to produce land. Okay, it's really simple. That was the formula. Those are the set of effects. The effect of the 5 points is to disestablish land, or to try to disestablish land, and to change land into datum, which was seen as a more egalitarian. Now, does it work? Does it work? No? What is that? What do you mean? Why do you say no? That's true. So it doesn't work on everybody as if it were an effect that was universal and was immediately effective on a constituency, right? So does the Ninth Symphony work? You like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? Do you? It's played every time there's a, like, the change in the millennium. It's played as a celebration of freedom and joy, right? Does it work? For everybody? So why should architecture work for everybody? Well, that's a question you better ask yourself, because you're at a school where the answer is no. Can't be a school about individualism if you then think your audience is the collective, the entire collective of humanity. Can you? It works for me. I'm highly sensitive to the trivialities of small architectural effects. It doesn't work in the way Corb naively imagined it would work, which was to distribute that effect forever. This is actually floating in an infinite conceptual space. It's really different from Mies, which is a vaster space. It's naive, I think, but we are still working on this problem. We're still working on how architecture can instantiate a much more egalitarian set of social relationships, celebrate differences, let's say, undermine, in a certain way, the way architecture automatically serves power. Not out of revolution, but in a way that art does. It's good. It's pretty good, I think. I mean, it's a really interesting problem. Now, that makes, I guess I'll close on one thing. All right, so. Can't walk on these walls, maybe, can you? H. These. All these single surface buildings that you can't do all that. Why do you think there's any interest in that?
Why do I think there's any interest?
Well, I have a collection of about 150 from all over the world.
Sure.
They're being built everywhere. And architects are absolutely, or were for the last 15 years, super interested in the problem. Remember the I-beam competition? You know, 6 of them in the 6 single surface buildings in one competition. And one won it. So if it serves no directly performative architectural effect, you can't see it, you can't walk on it, how do you imagine that why do you think it exercised such power on an imagination of the architects? So there's something for you to learn. I mean, one thing is clear, is it did exercise that power, right? I mean, it's clear, don't you think? There's so many of those projects. What do you think, people were doing it because they were copying other people? Is that what your model for that is?
No, I mean, you're asking a bunch of different things, so I don't know how to focus this one. We were talking about Mobius house, so I feel like you're saying a different thing.
Well, I'm saying, so you say, unlike the Mobius house, the fact that you can't walk up these continuous surface buildings doesn't really, that's not really important. Okay, I'll agree with that. Yeah. It's true.
I mean, again, you asked a question that was very specific to that one slide, so it's kind of unfair to characterize the thing that I had about that one thing in the wood and kind of make a statement about everything else.
Okay, I'll be fair. There's the same problem that bothered you about the Mobius house bother you about this building.
Well, no, it's not the same question. If you ask,
I agree. I agree. It's not the same question. I'm asking a different question. Are you disturbed by the fact that this continuous surface doesn't actually do anything?
to some degree, yeah. I would say, would I appreciate that more if it was in space, if you could utilize the spaces that we can't here on Earth? Yeah, that is more where I was going with my comment.
Okay.
About how you really utilize the space.
Okay. But when you mean you utilize, you're talking about the person that lives in it.
Sure.
Okay. This may be a contention between the two of us. If I had Ming in here or Craig in here, they'd be on your side. There's no evidence whatsoever that the discipline, to me, as far as I'm concerned, that the discipline of architecture, its historical significance, its cultural significance, and its potentials for the future have anything to do whatsoever with the experiences of the user in the building. Not one shred of evidence. In the entire history of domestic architecture, there's not one important interview with a person that lived in the house. Edith Farnsworth never lived in the Farnsworth house, sued Frank Lloyd Wright, and got sued Mies van der Rohe, and got Frank Lloyd Wright to testify for her that the house was unlivable, and it remains one of the great influential icons in architecture. Now the real question is, does the pleasures of a building mean the same thing as architecture? And my answer is going to be that if you, either we're teaching it all wrong and our history is completely misguided, or we're teaching it correctly, and as a simple technique of how it's very easy, absolutely simple-minded to meet the pleasures of the expectations of a client. Absolutely easy, even in really weird buildings. Turns out to be trivially easy. And those values are these for residential architecture. Cost, comfort, convenience, pleasure, pride, and familiarity. Those are the 6 values most associated with the judgment of residential architecture by journalists, critics, and clients. Is it comfortable? Is it convenient? If you look at Metropolitan Home Magazine, have you ever seen it? They have best house of the year. Every year, the best house is the house in some way that gets the kitchen, gets the garage closer to the kitchen. So you have to carry your bags less. Now, any of you live in a house with a garage, or you ever been in there? Is that a big deal? Fuck yes, it's a big deal. Like, the last thing in the world I want to do is park in a detached garage, carry my bags through the wind and snow. When you're living in it, it's a big fucking deal, you know? And it's true. And people can really learn how to make houses more pleasurable, more convenient, more comfortable. Pride has to do with how much it looks like the neighbors, what makes you look more important than the neighbors. Pleasure has to do with the views. Familiarity has to do with you don't look like a weirdo. These are really important effects, but they are absolutely easy to learn to achieve. It takes you 10 minutes. And you want me to show you how you do it? Then I'll close. Okay. I'm going to show you this. I'm sorry I didn't get my lecture, but this was fun. I'll do this sometime. Y'all weren't ready. You weren't laughing. You don't get to hear. Like here. Look at this. I'll just show you. This is my window. This is very problem. What's this? This is one of the great problems in contemporary architecture. Is that suburban houses put the ugliest thing in the world as the biggest thing in the front. So these are a couple of cute little architects, Winnie Moss and Cassandra, trying to figure out how to solve the suburban garage. There's some windows that aren't about light air. Here's some windows that aren't about light air. What's this window about? It's right down the street. Light, air, and view? Yeah. By the way, it lets light in, lets air in. What's it about? Can you prove that? Can you read this building real quickly and tell me what that window is about? How did it get like that? Okay, tossed up in the air. Something tossed it up in the air. Where was it before it got tossed up? You mean it fit in that wall? So it fit in this space, right? So somehow or another, before it got tossed up, it fit perfectly in that space. Something like an earthquake or something shook it. When it shook, it became three-dimensional. So all of a sudden, the window is no longer a flat thing, but a three-dimensional object. And not only that, something weird happened. This thing didn't shake. Air vent. But if you look at that front air vent and you rotate it back in your mind where it was before it shook, what's it an exact copy of? It's an exact copy of the window above it, upside down, which belongs to the suburban house that was bought. Okay, so Either you see that and you think that's incredible, or you're in the wrong fucking field. Because it boils down to audience effects, not constituency effects, because constituency effects are basically simple. Like, it's pretty easy to make a car run. So you can't say a car designer has to make a car run. You get mad when it doesn't run, but you're not really happy every day when the car starts. You're happy every day when it's a Jaguar and the car starts. So, you know, here's a window. This is Stephen Hall. Beautiful view of nature. Builds a thing for a client. Wants a vacation house in the Catskills. Stephen does something. They like the idea that dividing into two so that each have their spaces. He's got to give them a view to the woods. That's what they got the house for. Now, if you are going to perfect pleasure, what would you put there? What kind of window would you put there? There is one there. But if you're going to, like, your job is to figure out how to put this thing, view to the outside. It can stay on the board when they're inside, view to the outside, verify these windows. Let's say you want to make your client as happy as you can possibly be. What would you put there? Nothing. What about the winner for the client? Yeah. Yeah, they want the biggest possible window they can get. They want a picture window. And why couldn't you put a picture window there? Does anybody know? I guarantee you, if he could have put a picture window there, and the clients knew he could put a picture window there, he would have been forced to. So the reason that it's like that is not because he talked them into the architecture, is because one of those 6 values got in the way. And the reason is that much glass and that big a picture window is too fucking expensive. So no matter what, he has to break that window down into something, and from that point on, it's an architectural decision. What's the pattern? Does he put it regular? Does he put regular mullions? What he chooses to do is what? Does that pattern look familiar to you? Looks like Mondrian. Did somebody say Mondrian? Okay. Ha! You got it right. So what Steve does is means when you look out the window to nature, you see it through the frame of a painting. It's an argument about it undermines the distinction, the traditional distinction, metaphysical distinction between what's culture and what's nature. It shows the forest as a construction, as a painterly construction. It's interesting. And he would never have gotten to do it if it wasn't financially necessary. Here's exactly the same problem. Liz and Rick in the Slow House. They come up, they have this big picture window at the Slow House. I mean, you can see they solved it with financially the easiest way, but they wanted to set up an opposition. So they put a television set in the window so that when you're looking out the window at the sea, you also see a television picture of exactly the same view. Because they're interested in the relationship between nature, culture, and representation. And in fact, the two snails' ears, one is a television antenna, and the other is the fireplace. And so the fireplace and the television antenna are opposed against each other in the living room to make an argument about is hearth the center of the family, or is the television the center of family? Is television light any different than, or is it less natural than a fireplace light? It's a really credible argument. Here's exactly the same argument by Rem. Is this, so look, is this a real garden? Is this the real land of Seattle? No, it's already a fake real garden. When it comes inside, it turns into a garden. So even the argument is not enough, because these are three different ways of doing exactly the same argument that are set against each other in terms of their achievements. What was I going to show you? Oh, well. Does anybody remember what I was going to show? And then I'm going to go. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I was going to show you how you do how you can learn to do client-oriented architecture as better than you will ever learn at this school, much, much, much better than you will ever learn, be richer, famous, and spend a whole lot less money on your education. Would you like to see that? And I guarantee you, I swear to God, it will work. Here's how you do it. You go to Lowe's, and you go to this rack, and you buy, look, ultimate home plans. Every kind of plan. Like none of you, not one of you, can draw a fucking plan. You can cut 3D models with a horizontal plane, but you couldn't draw a plan that did anything good for anybody if your life depended on it. But for $9.95, $11, you get a bunch of it. All you want. Kitchens, bathrooms, drywall, $13 for how to build. I calculated that for $211, you can learn to be a great architect in no time, and it works. So when I have a problem at my house, you think I call an architect up and say, my thing's leaking or my lights won't run? No, I run out and buy one of these books. How to fix it. Windows, like 1,001 ideas for Windows. 1,001. That turns out to be 1,001 ideas for curtains on the same way. But it's still impressive. So you gotta, like, I'm not sure, I bet that's not in there. Like, I bet that idea, like, we now have 1,002 ideas. We got. So, at this school, the nice thing about an education is if you get it and you learn it, you can do it and follow it or reject it. But you have to learn it thoroughly. So at the school, the ethos of this school is that we have a responsibility to others through our architecture, but we don't do that by serving their otherness. That essentially that abstracts them into a trivial state. Pleasure, those 6 points, so violently abstracts them that the possibility of us enabling a larger existential world for them to find out who they are and what they might become is a power of architecture. And it starts at the problem of modernism, starts in the egalitarian, and now becomes, we're no longer as interested in democracy as we were, more interested in freedom.